Hello and welcome to the Module 1 of the workshop Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, or ADHD. ADHD, the three areas of diversity and their effect on learning and behaviour. As I've said, this is Module 1 and it's a background introduction to the condition and the three areas of diversity. Excuse me, I was just resetting my timer there. Okay. Now, my name's Andrew Whitehouse and I'm a TEDx speaker. I delivered a TEDx called From Disability to Superpowers. The TEDx that I delivered was very interesting, or I think it was interesting, because it looked at some of the things that people with neurodiversities can do that others cannot do, that other people cannot do. So I do recommend you have a little look at that. It's From Disability to Superpowers, TEDx, and it's on YouTube. I'm also a Bamford lecturer, and I delivered a Bamford lecture for the British Academy of Audiology, and that Bamford lecture was called Creating Autism-Friendly Audiology Clinics. What's interesting about that you might like to know is I did it in such a way that if you watch it, you may not be interested in audiology clinics, but you can glean from it the information to say, okay, I can't talk about audiology clinics, but this same information could help me create an autism-friendly classroom or an autism-friendly swimming baths or supermarket, or whatever you would like that to be. I deliver short courses for various organisations up and down the country, including the University of Lincoln and Bishop Grosseteste University. I'm employed as a forensic special educational needs and disability consultant. That means that I do work in the courts for special educational needs and disability cases as an expert witness. And I do training, observations and a range of keynote speeches at conferences. If you want to be in touch with me, you can speak to me on social media. I'm at Facebook, Andrew Whitehouse at People First Education, Twitter at Andrew W. SEN, Instagram at Andrew W. SEN, LinkedIn, Andrew Whitehouse. You can email Andrew at peoplefirsteducation.com, and I'm also on the web at peoplefirsteducation.com. So, on with the show. Here's a thought for you. I picked up this quote and I really like it. Education would be so much more effective if its purpose were to ensure that by the time they leave school, every boy and girl should know how much they don't know and be imbued with a lifelong desire to know it. That's a really interesting quote, and what a lovely thing if we could actually achieve that with all our children. When I was at school, I left with 2 very low level CSEs. Anyone out there can remember CSEs? And I left with 2 low level CSEs, which was way beneath what I was expected to get. But when I left school, I went pretty much immediately into further education, and I studied languages. I did my A levels, and then I went from there into university, and from there I've done 3 master's level qualifications. And so if you think about it, there's a massive difference, dichotomy between what I achieved at school and what I achieved out of school. And when I'm on these day courses, I often say to people, what do you think was the difference? What changed between school days and after school days when it came to my education? And the answer to that's quite simple, really. It was about the way that I was taught to learn, if that makes any sense. The way that I was taught to learn. So in school, it was, especially in the time when I was at school, I didn't really have a pupil voice. So I had to go to school, and it was very much, you will do as you're told and you will learn the way you're told to learn. When I left school and I went to college and I went to university, there was a difference, because then I had a voice, and that voice allowed me to be able to speak to my tutors, my teachers, etc., and say to them, could you help me? I'm not finding this easy. I can study better like this. I can study better like that. One of the things I found that I was really good at was being given, rather than being given all the information, by being given pointers to where to find the information, and that would allow me to then follow a trail of research, and that was my best way of learning. Now, the reason I'm telling you this is because wouldn't it be great if, as a starting point, just before we even really talk about the ADHD in depth here, wouldn't it be great if we could adopt that style of learning and teaching in the classroom and say, look, hello child, what could we do to help you? Is there something you find easier? Is there a way of getting through to you that works for you? And we will try and adopt that in the classroom. So straight away, we're looking at pupil voice and how we can access that to help the child learn. Listen to the child. Okay. How about a quiz? This is an ADHD quiz. Okay, there is only one question, so we won't ask you to pay attention for too long. In the centre of this picture, there's a man, and I'm going to ask you, who do you think this man is? When we do this on the day courses, people say, is it your dad? It's not my dad. It's definitely not my dad. And people guess all sorts of things, and occasionally people do get it. Well, the gentleman is called Oskar Schindler, and you may be aware of Oskar Schindler through Schindler's List, and the book and the movie. The book was also known as Schindler's Ark. We now know, through the work of my colleague Kevin Roberts, who's a great expert in the world of ADHD, we now know that Oskar Schindler had ADHD. And it's a very interesting story. I mean, despite the fact that Oskar Schindler, I would never undervalue the fact that Oskar Schindler was one of the greatest humanitarians of the 20th century. Oskar Schindler, when you read the book Schindler's Gift, which is the book about Oskar and his ADHD, Schindler's Gift, how one man harnessed ADHD to change the world. When you read this, you actually get a feeling for it. You don't really like him, or I didn't. I appreciated what he did greatly, obviously. And it's very difficult to criticise a person like that. But there was something about him that you think he was unreliable. He was untrustworthy. He was manipulative. He was a great liar. And prior to the war, and Oskar Schindler would tell you, the best thing that happened to him was the war. Prior to the war, he really never lived up to his expectations. He was always in trouble with the police. He was, I describe him, this isn't in the book, but I describe him as the sort of guy that would drive a motorbike at a tree to see if motorbikes could climb trees. After the war was, again, very interesting, is he achieved very little. Oskar Schindler, despite the fact that he'd created this factory during the war that employed all these people to basically produce things that didn't work, because he was adamant he didn't want to produce the weaponry for the war effort. He and he saved 3,000 Jewish lives. After the war, he couldn't even run a newsagent. And the reasoning behind that is, we have a saying that people with ADHD do extraordinary things, but in extraordinary times. But if you give them the banal, they really find it very, very difficult to cope with. So again, something worth looking at, Schindler's Gift. It's a really good text if you want to find out more about ADHD and individual cases of ADHD. So, ADHD, attention deficit hyperactive disorder, as you will probably know it. I've put the word impulsive on the screen. Just want to double check. Does that child in the corner of the screen come to any of your schools? I bet he does. Attention deficit hyperactive disorder, or attention deficit hyperactive impulsive disorder. You won't hear it called that with the impulsive in there, but I'm going to explain to you why I have called it that. So, excuse me while I'm clicking through things. There are 3 types of ADHD. There is the combined type: inattention, hyperactivity, and impulsivity. That's me. There is ADD, inattention and impulsivity. and there is hyperactivity, impulsivity. Now, I'm going to go through these one at a time and just sort of explain them, and we'll go into more detail as this little workshop goes on. But the combined type, basically what we're saying is that's a person that struggles to pay attention, that they will have fine motor or gross motor hyperactive movements. So there'll be big movements or little fiddly movements, which we're going to look at in one of the other later modules. And impulsive behaviour, they'll do surprising things that you're not expecting them to do. ADD is the same, but without the hyperactive behaviours. So ADD is the same, but you don't get those movements all the time, disproportionate movements. I should add, most children will have some kind of hyperactivity. This is disproportionate. And then we've got the hyperactive impulsive, which is basically they're moving about a lot. They will do impulsive behaviours, but they're okay at paying attention in the classroom to the teacher and things that need to be done. What's fascinating is we call the condition ADHD, and yet the most common, the one thing that runs through all types of ADHD is the impulsive behaviour. And the impulsive behaviour is not mentioned in ADHD. So I wonder if it would help you to think of it as attention deficit hyperactive impulsive disorder, or ADHD. I won't call it that during this workshop, but it's just something you could think, oh, ADHD, I remember that, so that you will always remember the impulsive behaviour. And it will help when you're speaking to colleagues about explaining what you've learned about ADHD. And it's also worth noting that most people, most professionals would say that the impulsive behaviour is the bit that causes them the most problems. So ADHD, attention deficit hyperactive impulsive disorder. And what I've also done is I've created a little diagram for you to help you remember that and to remember how it works. So what we've got here, we've got three arrows, inattention, impulsivity, hyperactivity, and they feed into one another. Now, if we were going to circle that, we could circle all three of those. Yeah, and we could say, right, impulsivity, hyperactive, inattention. Yeah, we can do that, circle all three of those. Or we could circle two, as long as they have the impulsivity in there. And actually, what I mean by that is you can have impulsive hyperactive, you can have impulsive inattention, but inattention hyperactivity is not ADHD. So there's one to be thinking about. Okay, moving along, and you'll have to excuse me because what I do, to get my timings right, I've got to click a click counter to know which slide I'm at. So just forgive me for that. ADHD. It says here, one of the most common disorders of childhood and adolescence. In my professional experience, and really depending on what you read, but in my professional experience and opinion, the most common disorder of childhood, adolescence, or neurological disorder or diversity is dyslexia. But ADHD comes a pretty close second to that. Last figures that I read, ADHD, we have twice as many people with ADHD as we do people with autism. And ADHD also has a far it's a far less popular condition when professionals are talking about it. So it's a harder to manage condition. So we get people come on a day course and they'll come in, and if they're maybe a one-to-one with a person with autism, they'll sit there and say, I'm a bit worried about this child today, so I've kept my phone on in case there's any problems. And they come in from ADHD and they say, oh, I'm so glad to be here today to get a day out of school. It's that kind of thing. And it's just me making a generalization, but it is a harder condition to manage. Massive amount of referrals to paediatricians, family doctors and mental health professionals. Huge amount of referrals. And it's worth sort of saying, not everybody gets the gets the diagnosis that they would like. But it's also worth saying, you know, children are designed for jumping, bouncing, and generally getting on your nerves. You know, I'm a father of 4 and I understand this, but this is the, you know, not all hyperactivity is ADHD, not all impulsive behaviours are ADHD. And, you know, there are a lot of sort of just social and manageable conditions, and there's an awful lot of just letting these lot of young people do the jumping about and bouncing about that they need to do. In a class of 20 to 30, one may have ADHD. So what we're saying is, in every class, there's probably a child with ADHD. You might not be aware of it, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to be talking about that as we go along. When I talk about the presentations of boys and girls with ADHD as well, we'll cut into that, and I'll have a little sort of dig in there and explain some interesting different presentations. And what we're saying is, again, 3 to 9% of the school stroke college population. What I'm trying to say there is, it's different regionally, but it's somewhere between 3 and 9% on as we look at it on a national basis. So only 1 in 3 of these will have ADHD causing major difficulties. ADHD is not the naughty disease. It is not, it's a behavioural condition in as much as everything you do is a behaviour of some kind, but it is not a challenging behaviour condition. And so, you know, and so only 1 in 3 will have ADHD causing challenging behaviour and major difficulties. If we look at that as well, what we need to know is that generally only 1 in 3 will have ADHD that gets some kind of help. And so, you know, only 1 in 3 will get the help that they need. And so, and it's not difficult to work out that the 3 that get the help they need are the ones, you know, the 1 in 3 that gets the help they need will be the ones with the challenging behaviour, because it's more obvious. When people aren't bothering you, you don't feel quite the need to investigate so much. It's predominantly, but not exclusively, male. So we think it's somewhere around the 80% mark that would be male with ADHD. So if we had 100 people with ADHD in the room, 80 of those people would be boys. However, what's worth remembering there is 20 of them will be girls. So I've worked in several girls' schools, and all of the children with ADHD in the girls' schools have been girls. Of course they are. It's a girls' school. But what I'm saying is we can't ignore the girls with ADHD. I would also say that back in my days as a teacher, the most challenging behaviour child I ever worked with was a girl with ADHD. And so, you know, it's an interesting thing. However, it's also worth picking up on some of the work of Professor Thomas Phelan, who's an American specialist in ADHD. And Thomas Phelan talks about what he calls pleasant space cadets. And the pleasant space cadets, and he says, are usually girls. And he said they're sitting at the back of the classroom, and they're staring out the window, and you probably think that they're not, you know, they're not that academically advanced. They're probably cleverer than you. It's just that, you know, you're not teaching them in the way that they need, and that would be a very typical sort of presentation of ADD, that attention deficit and impulsivity, but without the hyperactivity. Quite happy to stare out the window and not cause anyone any troubles, and you're just not getting to them. So that's the that's most definitely the pleasant space cadet that Thomas Phelan talks about. And I'm sure, whilst I'm talking about this, I'm sure you've all got examples of this that you've noticed in your own practice. ADHD may be inherited, and other family members may have it. like any condition, like a lot of conditions rather, not any condition, like a lot of conditions, we do really sort of look at family background and find out what's going on. When I was, when I was working in schools, we had a saying, look at the parents, and I think that's a fair thing to do, to find out, whether this has come down the family line. But it is, it does help to sort of look at the parents and ask parents about their childhood memories and experiences when it comes to looking at these neurological diversities. Okay. Again, when I'm running a day course, you might have 30 or 40 people in the room. I always ask the difficult question: is there anyone here that's a bad parent? And people look around and they're all a bit sheepish, and maybe, some of them will put their hand up, and I certainly put my hand up. Now, I'm not a bad parent all the time, but I'm a bad parent sometimes. And the interesting thing about that is that that when I'm a good parent, I get good results from my children. When I'm a bad parent, I get bad results from my children, because people respond to what you put in. And so if I sit and I read my children a story at bedtime, you're going to get good results from your kids. They're going to enjoy that. They're going to want to engage with you, and they're more likely to go to bed a bit quietly. And if I'm working, if I'm at my desk and I'm busy and I'm go away, Daddy's busy, story tomorrow, then I know that it's going to be a little bit more tricky settling them down that night. You get out what you put in. The same is of teaching. I am firmly of the belief that the biggest cause of challenging behaviour in the classroom is when the teaching doesn't hit the mark. And then again, I would ask on the courses, when we're at a day course, I say, put your hand up if you're a bad teacher. Keep your hand up if you've taught the worst lesson that's ever been. It was so bad you had to leave that lesson yourself. Yeah? And then keep your hand up if you've taught a lesson that is so good that you wished Ofsted or someone had been there to witness that marvellous lesson. Because let's face it, most teachers go through phases of fantastic lessons, not so fantastic lessons. It's the nature of the beast. And in actual fact, when I do see teachers that are teaching at an outstanding level all the time, I generally will have a chat with their line manager and say, is this person okay? Because I don't want them to, I don't want to see people teach. I do want to see people teaching like that, but the impact on your life will be quite massive. And so, but again, you will notice the difference in the response from your pupils, as the parents will. ADHD is not caused by bad diet. That's an interesting point to make, because no, bad diet does not cause ADHD, but bad diet does not help. And anyone watching this will know that you've got things that you eat that don't agree with you. So whilst we're filming this, I'm actually recording this film during the lockdown period for the coronavirus. And, I've been having to eat different things. I've been eating a lot more healthier. But the other night I had a pizza, a takeaway pizza, like one of these ones you get in a box from the supermarket, and warmed it up. First one I'd had in ages. Prior to this, I'd almost lived on these things. And it hit me, quite shocked my system, because actually it was not a healthy food going into me for the first time in a long time. And I had the night up with acid indigestion. The next day I've had a bad night's sleep. I'm in a bad mood. You see where I'm going with this. Bad diet does affect it. And, if one of the things we do say with ADHD is one of the things that are really helpful is a good Mediterranean diet. Plenty of fresh food, that sort of thing. Fish, all the things your kids don't want to eat, probably. And so that's, that would again with something. I also try and avoid things like bleached foods. So eat brown bread, brown rice, brown pasta. If you can get them to eat it, maybe cutting the dairy out, not too much meat, red meat, that sort of thing. But generally, it's common sense stuff. But then, isn't that for all of us? Okay. ADHD does not mean naughtiness. Now, I'm being intimate with you now, so I'm going to have a little sip of my coffee. ADHD does not mean naughtiness. And so what we're saying here is ADHD is not the naughty disease. It's a presentation, and not all naughtiness is caused by ADHD. Now, that's an interesting thing to investigate as well, because like everybody else, a person with ADHD can be in a bad mood and just be unpleasant. I'm sure everyone watching this, and I'm saying this and I'm going, no. I just see people sitting at home going, no, I'm not like that. And I'm thinking, oh, maybe it's just me. But, you know, there are people you dislike for no reason whatsoever, then you just dislike them. You know, and I know there's not too many people, I'm happy to say, excuse me, but there's the odd person that I meet and I think, oh my goodness, I really can't get on with this person. I really can't. And you know, and that just does happen. But then sometimes our behaviours are guided by what's going on around us. If you've ever, let's think of something. You've found out that there's a load of money missing out of your bank account. I think that's happened to most people at some point, and you've misjudged something, or there's been a mistake, or what have you. It will send you into a position of stress, and then you're in that position of stress, and you'll behave a little bit more challenging. I'm going to tell you a little secret about something that happened to me yesterday. I've got several of these courses, over 20 of these courses to write and deliver. And I found out that I'd actually overwritten 2 hours of work. I'd literally typed over it and saved the wrong document, and it was gone forever. Okay, so I want you to just take a little guess at sort of what kind of mood I was in after that. Yeah, I was in a dreadful mood, and my behaviours were, you know, quite sort of, I don't want to say aggressive. It wasn't aggressive, but just that little bit abrupt, and you know, and because you've had this external stress. And it's the same with ADHD, only magnified. So a person with ADHD, they can find these things magnifying. But in the same token, a person with ADHD can still just misbehave just because. So it's worth bearing that in mind. And thank you to Mr. Roger Hargreaves for the illustration there. So, when is ADHD most recognised? So ADHD is most recognised in the United Kingdom in year 2. Year 2 is the end of infants, it's the end of Key Stage 1, and it's where we have SATs, SATs testing. It's also where a child is expected to be coming a little bit more out of that learning through play, a little bit less sort of self-initiated learning and play, and there'd be more work, more independent work. We expect them to get on themselves. There'll be more homework going home, probably led to a certain degree by the SATs, and let's be honest, the teacher is under huge pressure, the school is under huge pressure to get those results, and so that will reflect on the child. And we then start to discover those kids that are finding it difficult to sit still, that are finding it difficult to engage, that things like their impulsive behaviours, that their inattention, and all those things that had been less of a problem in the past are now having an impact on our future goals. So year 2 is when we really start noticing it. Unsurprisingly, the next one would be year 6. And year 6, we've got the SATs again, the year 6 SATs. So we've got all those same things. Is we've upped our game that little bit more, and we're having to expect a little bit more from the child. We've also got the fact that this child is moving from one environment to another, and therefore there's lots and lots of preparation there, and lots of stress and anxiety about that move. And of course, your strategies that you've used in primary school. I mean, I can remember one young lad who used to just, in the afternoons, in year 6, this was back in my teaching days, he used to go into the main hall in the afternoons when he couldn't cope too much, and he'd kick a ball about. He'd just kick a ball around this hall for the afternoon if no one was in there, or go outside, because he just literally couldn't deal with those afternoons. But of course, we were there, you know, there was myself and the Senko at the time. I remember me and the Senko both saying, you know, we failed this guy, because actually he's going to go off to secondary and he now hasn't got the skills he needs to get him through secondary school. And so, you know, that's another big wake up moment, certainly was for me and this Senko. I do a lot of work in further education, and this mirrors my own experiences, and my own experiences of further education and higher education were very positive ones, and there are major improvements for a lot of the people coming up into further education. There are various reasons that people would go into further education, and one of them is that they may well have not done so well at school or in secondary school, and so they're needing to have a second bite of the apple, if you like. And so the pastoral needs are going to be greater in those environments, that you're going to have to be working that little bit harder, and lots of things get picked up that had maybe not been picked up before, in particular dyslexia, which we're talking about in a later workshop. But the pastoral thing, we've also got the fact that there will be a lot more student choice, that they will be there, and it may well be vocational. So it's something like, you know, if they're doing something like construction or hair and beauty or accounting, bookkeeping, anything like that, then, you know, there is that vocational thing, and there can be a little bit more understanding of the end point of this. We have less classes, less teachers, and so you know, you're not doing quite so many subjects as you might have been doing before in secondary school, and you do see the relevance of those subjects. So we do see some really good improvements in further education. Okay. Inattention. There you go. There he is, wishing he was somewhere else. I was a bit like that at school. I don't know how many of you were like that at school. If you look at his picture, he's there, he's got his exercise book in front of him, but he's thinking about football. And I used to, when I was at school, I think the bubble, I've never really particularly enjoyed football too much, but I think that bubble would have had a guitar in it. I was obsessed with guitars, and in my school books, I used to draw pictures of different guitars, all different weird and wonderful shaped guitars. Quite clearly wanted to be someone else and somewhere else at that time. And I was delighted to find out that George Harrison of the Beatles also did similar stuff in his school books, drew pictures of guitars. I saw it on an interview or something, and I thought, oh well, but he did a lot better with his guitar pictures. But that inattention, that wishing you were somewhere else, your mind, your body's in the room, but your mind most definitely isn't. So, inattention. Inattention is, I'm going to go into it in great detail. We're going to do a full workshop on inattention. But one of the things I wanted to say about inattention was, it's not just about the inability to pay attention. It can be the needing or the seeking of attention. You've all got attention seeking, attention needing children in your classes. It also can be the inability to pay attention to detail. So the sort of person that will build an engineering model with nuts and bolts, but miss out all the washers, or as what happened to my son and I, who we assembled a petrol lawnmower and we forgot to put the spark plug in, And so, you know, that lack of attention to detail, quite crucial detail, and you give it, you know, you're failing to give close attention to detail, and you're making the silly mistakes. So, just like to share with you that when I was at school, I made a dovetail joint in my woodwork CSE, which was held together with sellotape. So, something to share, but that's very, very ADHD. You might get their attention, but keeping their attention might be really difficult. So, difficulty sustaining attention with young people. You're talking to them, you're sharing information with them, and you just can't get them to stay with you, and they're easily distracted. So it's the whole "oh look a squirrel" thing, and so difficulty keeping attention. It might be worth. I'm going to be looking at the attention spans on a later workshop, but it's just worth saying now. You know, if you're trying to keep people with ADHD's attention for longer than for children, sort of longer than 5 or 10 minutes, and adults, you know, 10 or 15 minutes, then you probably will fail. So you might get their attention, but you might not be able to keep their attention. Of course, we do know, I'm not sure what that was. We do know that to keep, one of the ways to keep their attention is to talk about something they're interested in. The people with ADHD may have a low attention span when they're talking about something that's maybe in their eyes boring, but in actual fact, if you talk to them something, you know, if you would have talked to me at school about guitars, you might have kept my attention for a long, long time. And I'm sure there's people out there who have noticed that there are children that can talk to infinity when, you know, and keep their attention to infinity when you're talking about something they're interested in. So final little point on that, often doesn't seem to listen when spoken to. If a person with autism looks like they're not listening, they probably are listening, you know, or they may well be listening. If you look at a person with autism, if they look like they're not listening, it's because they don't feel the need to make eye contact or look in your general direction. It's not a natural reaction to them. In ADHD, if a person looks like they're not listening, it's probably because they're not listening and you're being a bit boring. And so, again, worth sort of bearing that in mind. Okay. Inattention. Okay. Doesn't follow through, fails to finish school and college work, jobs, duty in the workplace. So, you know, I can really engage with this and I can relate to it because I can remember, you know, I found it very depressing at school that I couldn't engage with schoolwork that I knew I could do, that I understood, that I fine, you know. And I remember, particularly in maths, I used to go in and speak to my math teacher, and I used to say to her, you know, I'm going to really, really be doing well today. I'm going to really work hard today. I'm going to do this stuff, and I'm, you know, and I promise you, I might have even stayed up all night, promising myself that I was going to do this, and obsessing over this thing. And then I would get to school, and I would tell my teacher this, and by 9:20, it was back to the same old Andrew, really not following through, unable to finish this. You know, and again, if we think back to, if you look at the Oscar Schindler book, if you get the chance to read it, you know, here we're saying failing to finish school and college work. For Schindler, he really was a man of unfinished projects. And at one point, he used to set businesses up, say to his wife, you know, leave her to it and go off somewhere. And she'd say, but Oscar, you know, you need to do this. He'd say, I'm the panache. Well, I don't know about the panache, but, you know, not finishing things is very much the ADHD. Jobs, and when we get into the world of work, duties in the workplace. This isn't because people with ADHD are oppositional. This isn't because they don't understand. This is because they have a neurologically different way of doing things, and actually finishing these tasks, you know, things kind of fizzle out for them. And it also is the banal. I mean, I found myself during the coronavirus lockdown. I mean, I'd like to hope that some of you are watching this long after it's all long gone and forgotten. But I've never worked so hard in my life because all of a sudden things have been moved on from the banal. We're in extraordinary times, and I feel the need to do extraordinary things. So it is different. It is different for ADHD. Okay. People with ADHD tend to be quite disorganized. I could tell you all the stuff on the screen, but I'm going to start with this. I have a theory about ADHD that is not shared by any academics and professionals that I work with, but I do believe this to be fact in the world of ADHD, that the cause of the disorganization problems is in fact aliens. And the reason I say it's aliens is I can sit at my desk and I can get a pen, or here's a good thing, this is a screwdriver. I've bought boxes and boxes and sets of screwdrivers in my life. I have bought more sets of screwdrivers than you can possibly imagine. And I will take my screwdrivers and I will put them down. I will go back to my screwdriver and it will be gone. And the only explanation for that missing screwdriver is aliens. If you've got a better idea, you come to me. But I'm telling you now, aliens stole my screwdrivers, my pens, my tools, everything here. Everything. Because actually, people with ADHD have difficulty organising tasks and activities. We know that. And we find it difficult. And I work with kids who also, young people who aliens have stolen all their stuff, They'll do anything to avoid sustained mental effort, college, directed tasks, dog ate my homework, all that kind of stuff. Stop fiddling. And we're constantly losing things. People with ADHD always losing stuff. And forgetful. The biggest gift you can give to a person with ADHD is the gift of lists. Lists are hugely important to people with ADHD because they're so forgetful. Short-term memory problems. Okay, credit to the Beano, 2003, hyperactivity. The most famous hyperactive character in children's literature, I think, is probably Billy the Whiz. There are a few other characters that I enjoy watching on television that I think have got ADHD. If anyone ever watched Breaking Bad or Better Call Saul, I think Saul Goodman is a fantastic ADHD character. He really captures it. There's one particular episode where he's got all the mobile phones. I do really strongly recommend you watch this. And he's got he's running some scam, and he's got a load of mobile phones in front of him, maybe 15 mobile phones, my memory even more. And they've all got bits of masking tape stuck to them with different people's names, and he's picking up the phones and doing all the different voices. And I feel echoes of Oscar Schindler and his manipulative ways, Better Call Saul, but fantastic ADHD character. And obviously the sadly missed Robin Williams, who clearly had ADHD, had lots of other issues as well. But again, I enjoy watching Robin Williams' TV interviews. His films are good, but the interviews are fascinating because you literally don't know where he's going to go next. And it's very much that hyperactive and crossed over into that impulsive way. Back to Billy the Whiz. Billy the Whiz was very much a character who, it was a bit like that, failing to give close attention to detail. He'd do things really quickly, really get the job done real fast, then find out he'd missed out half the things that he needed to do. And so you'd have to go back and do things again. And again, it's a bit like me having to rewrite my presentation from yesterday. That missing out the important stuff. So, people with ADHD are more restless and fidgety than neurologically typical people during the day and during sleep. There are so many things I need to talk about in that sentence. I mean, the first thing to say is that, ADHD, like all neurological conditions, does not go away at bedtime. It just doesn't. It's there all day. It's there all night. And so you know, a lot of people with ADHD will say they do not get any relief from their ADHD. Some will be medicated. We've got medication during the day, medication at night, but they're more restless, more fidgety. What that also implies is that people with ADHD struggle to sleep. And because they struggle to sleep, they get a bad night's sleep. And you know yourself, if you've had a bad night's sleep, what kind of mood you're in. You may be not in a good mood the next day. And so, because you've not slept well, and we have this ongoing cycle. And I often wonder about children with ADHD when they come into school in the morning. They've had a bad night's sleep. What sort of mood you're in? Are you coming in on a number 5? Are you ready to learn? That's a good one, isn't it? I mean, I'm going to be looking at that in later workshops. But one of the questions that I ask when I'm in a school is when they say, this child isn't engaging with their learning. My question is, are they ready to learn? Is that something they're ready to do? And sometimes we might need a little bit of a warm-up activity to get that child ready in the classroom. Within hyperactivity, there's different types of hyperactivity. There's the gross motor hyperactivity, the big movements that some people will do. Those are the people that need to get up and walk about. Those are the people that need to sort of throw a ball around. They do all those things. And then we've got the fine motor activity, hyperactivity, which you saw me fiddling with the screwdriver a little bit earlier. It can be anything. Really can be absolutely anything. But that's those small movements. Again, I'm going to do a full workshop. There's a full workshop on hyperactivity where you'll be able to engage with that and look at those different things. Restless and squirmy, sitting in your chair, doing all those things. I'm going to be looking at that and looking at some resources to help with that. Verbal hyperactivity. Talky. Yeah. And again, there are times and places for that, and there are lots of things that we can do to help with that. And I will be sharing that with you. Hyperactivity often varies according to the situation. In the most extreme cases, if you're very stressed, then you will likely be very hyperactive. If you're having a very calm time, a lot of people with ADHD do well with things like meditation and also calming activities, maybe playing a musical instrument, building some Lego, anything that kind of engages you in that way, that can bring the hyperactivity down and channel it. And of course, the level of stimulation. Level of stimulation is quite a tricky one. If you overstimulate a person with ADHD, they will behave in a hyperactive way. If you understimulate a person with ADHD, they will behave in a hyperactive way, probably. And so what you've got to do is work out that middle ground and say, okay, what works best for this person with ADHD and what can we put in place? Right. Moving on again. Gosh. Fidgeting with things, you can be looking out for that. For me, it's quite simple, really. If you've got a child that needs to fidget, let them fidget. Give them something to fidget with. At the most extreme, I've seen classrooms where children, I really have seen, where they're told to keep their hands on the desk and just watch the teacher, This is not the ADHD way. Actually, I'm not quite sure it's anybody's way. But fidgeting and messing around and fiddling with stuff. Leaving the seat in class, getting up, wandering about, that's something. You might have to rotor that in, and there's lots of ways we can do that, and I will be going through all that kinds of stuff. But the fidgety, the leaving seat, both of those things are worth thinking about. So if that child needs that, then put it in place for them. The only person who will lose if you try and fight that will be you, because actually they need this, and that will just escalate their behaviours. Running about and climbing, we need to have that stuff. I always jokingly say, if you keep a child with ADHD in playtime Who's going to have the rough time, you or them? Well, it's going to be you, because you've kept them in at playtime, and they're going to be doubly hyperactive after that playtime. So it's something worth considering. As we get into adults, restlessness, not being able to sit still, watching a movie is quite tricky. A lot of people with ADHD, when they're watching films, when we used to use DVDs more, would watch DVD with the timer counting down backwards, so they know how long they've got to sit. That's quite a helpful one. But there are other things, sitting through an assembly for children, it's very, very difficult. And, for adults, sitting through conference presentations, can you imagine, or stuff like that, it's quite tricky. So that restlessness, that needing to get up, that needing to move about, it can be quite important to put that in place. Difficulty engaging in leisure and play quietly. They're just busy people. These are the people that ride bicycles on trampolines. These are the people that create more and more dangerous activities in order to have their fun. And then of course you've got talking excessively. They're just going on and on and on and telling you everything. And it's kind of in line with autism. When people with autism are talking about their special interests, you get a lot of that. You get a lot of that sort of stuff. So hyperactivity, really important to consider. And then we get into impulsivity. Impulsivity, by the time I figure out what I'm going to do, I've already done it. Just before we move on with this, I'd just like to point out that this lad on this picture, I think it's a boy, maybe not, but anyway, this person in this picture has got red hair, and it seems that, just check this out if you want a bit of fun, that there's an inordinate amount of books about ADHD where the child has got red hair on the cover. So I don't know why. I'm not aware of any medical evidence to link ADHD with redheads. Anyway, by the time I figure out what I'm going to do, I've already done it. Okay, I'm going to show you something. If you can see it in the camera, I don't know if you can see it in the camera, but there's a scar here on my skin.
You can sort of see it.
Can sort of see it. Thank you. Thank you to the cameraman, Isaac. This is specifically there so I can show off how brave I was. But actually, this was a child with ADHD, and he was playing with something that he shouldn't have been, fiddling with something, and I was teaching at the time, and I took it off him. I didn't say why. I didn't say what I was going to do. I didn't say when he was going to get it back. I just took it off him. And at that exact moment, he came over the table at me with a pair of scissors, about 8 years old, this kid. And he went to stab me with the scissors. I put my hand there and blocked him. So I cut my hand. And he got excluded from school for a few days. Now, what's interesting about that is I am firmly of the belief that that was my fault. If you should take something off a child, well, first of all, I think he needed to fiddle. Secondly, if you're going to take something off a child, you need to warn them first. I know a story about a child who had a pencil topper taken off them by a teacher. And, it came home, this child, and said to the parents, well, I don't know when I'm going to get my pencil topper back. You take it. You tell them why you've taken it. You tell them when they're going to get it back. And if they're not going to get it back, why they're not going to get it back. Explain things to the child. Very, very important to bear that in mind. But when a child with ADHD has done that, that is impulsive behaviour. And, when you say to them, what did you do that for? And they say, I don't know. It's probably because they don't know. That's the reality of it. So by the time I figure out what I'm going to do, I've already done it. Why did you do that? I don't know. So we've got to kind of not bait them almost. We kind of keep people in a position of calm where they know what's happening, they know what's going on, and they know how to deal with that. And there's no big surprises. And what they might perceive as injustices. Okay. There's a great picture there of some extreme basketball going on, and I love the guy's face in that picture. What's interesting about that picture is that that ADHD is not necessarily a deficit to life. My dad used to call me Mouth Almighty, was one of his names for me. I'm squirming. And the other one was Tramp's Overcoat. Anyone heard that? No one's ever heard that when I talk about that when I'm out and about. He says, you're on all the time, like a tramp's overcoat. It's kind of funny, really. But, you know, hey, Dad, I'm a professional speaker now. What we're saying is everybody needs to find their groove. And one of the things I do with when I work with parents is to say, look, you know, just because your child doesn't fit into mold A, they will probably fit into mold B, you know. And so we find sport really good. I mean, if we're looking at impulsivity, and you've got the Nike advert, I believe, is something like, now think about this, look at the consequences, weigh it up, look at the pros and cons, and then maybe do it. No, it's not. Of course it's not. Sport doesn't work like that. Nike advert is just do it. And that's the ADHD way. And that's that picture of those basketball players. Just do it. And you know, for me, it's working in different environments, in different places. I'm in a different place every day. I'm having different challenges every day. That works really well for me. People with ADHD struggle to wait in turn. They wait for their, you know, waiting for their go at something can be quite tricky. So we, you know, we can put things in place. I know, you know, people are sort of quite unkeen on sort of kids with handheld devices and games on their phones. Most it's on your phones these days. You know, people don't have the devices so much, but you know, these are great resources if you're queuing up to go on a ride at a fun fair or a theme park or something like that. It's great. And in actual fact, I would rather do that than for these kids than to have the passes that let them jump the queue. Because if you have a pass that lets them jump the queue, what you're basically creating there is a child who hasn't learned strategies to queue up. So although it works in some cases, I would say in most, I would be moving away from that, and I would be looking at strategies to help them wait in turn. Interrupting, you know, when you've got something really important to say, you've got something important to get across, interrupting can happen. Intruding, personal space. Hey, how are you? You know, those are the sorts of things that again can cause problems in ADHD. And butting into conversations and games, just getting stuck in without thinking about it. This is the impulsive behaviour in ADHD, and it is part of it, and it is part of every type of ADHD. So other issues, coordination difficulties. People with ADHD can, excuse me, people with ADHD can present with coordination problems. Bumping in, we'll start with that coordination problems. So I'm laughing. I've seen something you can't. Coordination problems, coordination difficulties. Yeah, bumping into things and people, spilling and dropping things. Let's start with the bumping into things and people. When a child with ADHD bumps into someone and they're a little bit embarrassed about that, they might blame the other person. That's quite a common one. Spilling and dropping things. Again, you know, it's a lot better now. We've got drinks with lids on in classrooms and things like that. There's a lot less problems with that. Poor fine motor skills. A lot of people with ADHD get the shakes. You shake, you know, and so it affects their handwriting and it affects their ability to sort of do other things. You know, so I know one particular child who's medicated because he likes to use a soldering iron, and that's quite helpful as well, to sort of get those medications in there. They can be quite useful. Weighted pens, weighted pens for people with ADHD can help with the poor handwriting, because otherwise, you know, this can lead to self-esteem, low self-esteem. The low self-esteem is interesting because sadly that child will be good at other stuff. It may not be in the mould of everybody else in the class, the other 29 pupils, but you know, that low self-esteem is probably unnecessary, because they probably have really great skills in other areas. But that then, of course, leads into other issues, and those other issues will be opposition and defiant behaviour. And so what we're talking about there is the child that is maybe a little bit stubborn, argumentative and aggressive. So what I put there on the screen, how does that present and why is it happening? Well, it's happening because they feel a little bit left out of society. They're always in trouble, they're always accused of doing things, they're always, you know, there's always something that they're given, they feel responsible for, or they just don't feel like they don't feel like that they're fitting in. And again, this is not necessary, because we want to find those skills, we want to enhance those skills, we want to help that child to fit in a more secure way. Of course, if it's unaddressed, we then get into conduct problems, behaviours. Quite often these behaviours are literally just to help fill the time. They're literally just to quell the boredom. You know, I'm bored, so what am I going to do? And so we get into sort of behaviours like that. Or, you know, the picture there's got a box of matches. You leave a box of matches lying around, an inquisitive child with ADHD who maybe doesn't think through the consequences and just does it, as we said earlier, they're going to experiment with matches. What burns the best in my house? What burns the best in my school? And it's something that can happen. That can happen quite a lot. We then know it's going to be difficult to learn. So, you know, I talked to you about attention spans, and, you know, we're looking at 5 and 10 minute attention spans. Some of the best teaching and learning that I see is short burst learning, where these kids are just given short tasks to do over a short period of time, and then start on another task, start on another task, start on another task. We then get that completion. So we get jobs done, completed, move on to the next thing, because they're not too much of a strain. But quite often this doesn't happen. And I've seen sort of children 9, 10, 11 years old expected to sit for an hour concentrating on one thing. And it's quite torturous for them, because they don't have that. And then they find that the learning then is quite difficult for them. So this would lead into poor social skills. We can, you know, I'm always a bit nervous of using statistics, because everything you read's got different statistics in it. But poor social skills, you know, I have read about 30% behind with social skills. Well, that gets worse as you get older, because, you know, the difference between 6 and 4 years old is a lot less than the difference between 12 and 8 years old. But poor social skills, so we do have to be teaching some social skills, and we can get quite good success in that, using our visual stories and using role play and things like that. We can get some good social skills going, so worth looking at. Here's probably the most important slide of the morning. Might be looking in the evening, but this is the one of the most important slides in this workshop. We're all a bit like this sometimes, when we are stressed, tired, bored, not in the mood, unable to concentrate, distracted, excited, agitated, anxious. Everybody, fidgety and restless. This is everybody. this is, you know, I don't know a human being that doesn't have these things go on with them at some point in their life. But what is interesting and somewhat disturbing is that a person with ADHD will probably be like this all the time. And so, you know, you want to consider that. You know, I'm going to go back to that scale of 1 to 10. You know, if we were managing contentment and anxiety levels and that sort of thing, you know, if you're on a 9 most of the time, your ADHD person's probably sitting on a 5 or a 6, and we have to do that. And I think one of the things in that is to cut them a little bit of slack and sort of be aware that actually some of these things aren't just working out for them quite as well. I mean, sometimes you can be like this when you're ill, you know. Well, in ADHD, it's persistency. It's all the time. And that is that very much that case of every day is a new day. If a child, you know, if a child you're working with, a child you're living with, you know, you get them up in the morning and or they arrive to school in the morning, just cut them that little bit of slack, a little bit of TLC, a little bit of extra care and attention, because you really, you know, you don't know how they've entered into the world since waking up that day, if indeed they've had a reasonable night's sleep. Okay. Another thing you need to consider with ADHD, we're getting close to the end of this workshop now, but something you do need to consider with ADHD is that ADHD is a very interestingly not a condition that usually comes on its own. If you had 100 people in the room with ADHD, that would be a good party. I'd buy a ticket for that. 100 people in the room with ADHD, only 31 of those people would have ADHD and nothing else. The other 69 of those people would have something else as well. And then we're getting into some really interesting figures. So this is just the one that I'm using. You'll find different ones out there, more complex and slightly simpler ones, but I like this one. Seems to be about the right level. This one says 50% of people with ADHD are dyslexic. 50% will have motor disorders. That's some kind of movement problem or dyspraxia problem, maybe something like that. 25% of people with ADHD may well be autistic. 40% oppositional problems, and you can see going through these that there's always something else as well. And ADHD regularly does not come on its own. And so it is interesting, and it is worth noting that if you're teaching a child with ADHD and you see other things that don't quite fit into that mold, again, that's probably right. That's probably right. You know, and one of the best pieces of advice I can give you is work with what you see, not with what you're told to see. So if something doesn't look like ADHD, but it's definitely there, address that. That'll be helpful to you and the child. So I'm going to finish you off now, just to really sort of recap what we talked about. There are 3 distinct areas of ADHD that you need to be looking at. Number 1 is attention deficit, and we've got the homework here, which I'm setting for you. So number 1 is attention deficit. What are you doing to help that child pay attention? Or are there other attentional needs in there? What can you do to help that young person pay attention? Hyperactivity. Have you put something in place for hyperactivity? Have you created something that helps them get that out of their system so that they're in a place where they're ready to learn? And then finally, impulsive behaviours. You know, are you shocking them? Are you putting things in place they don't know how to deal with? Are you asking for quick responses? Are you throwing stuff at them? Not physically throwing stuff at them, but ideas or concepts at them that make them act in an impulsive way when possibly you could have led that in. Now, this is the first ADHD workshop, and so all of these things we'll be going into in greater detail in later workshops, but certainly for this one, at the level we've been at today, 5 things you are going to change. And you can email me those things at andrew@peoplefirsteducation.com. Thank you very much for listening, and look forward to module 2.